You've been told your thoughts are yours, that your mind is the engine room of logic, decision, and control. But what if that entire premise is wrong? Not just slightly mistaken, but completely inverted? What if thinking, as you know it, is not something you're doing, but something you're hearing? We assume we're the source of our thoughts. We say, I think, as if the stream running through the mind is self-generated. But have you ever noticed how thoughts arrive? Fully formed, unsolicited, sometimes even unwanted. They echo into your awareness like voices from a radio station you never remember tuning into. And yet you believe you're the broadcaster? This isn't about metaphors or philosophy. It's about something more precise. Your so-called thoughts are frequencies. And your brain? It's a receiver. You're not thinking in the way you've been taught. You're listening constantly, unconsciously. To what? To fields. To programs. To voices that don't originate from your identity but infiltrate it. This truth is so hidden because it threatens the entire idea of self-control. It strips away the illusion of autonomy. It forces a deeper question. If I'm not the thinker, who or what is speaking into me? This video is not about fixing your thoughts. It's about exposing the real mechanics behind them. We're going to lift the veil, decode the voices, and ask the question no one dares to. What if your mind isn't yours at all? If something inside you just shifted? If you're starting to question whose voice you've really been listening to, then you're already tuning out of the illusion. Type, I hear it now, in the comments if you're beginning to recognize the signal behind the noise. And if this truth resonated with you in a way you can't explain, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Because what's coming next will dismantle even more of the lie. Segment 1. The Phantom Speaker. Who's actually behind your thoughts? There is a voice in your head that sounds like you. It moves like you, speaks like you, even reacts in ways you would expect yourself to react. Because it's so well practiced in your tone and manner, you accept it without question. But the strange part is that this voice may not actually be you. It's a perfect impersonator, a mimic that has followed your habits and experiences closely enough to disguise itself as your identity. Over time, it has learned the exact rhythm of your thought patterns, the phrases you tend to repeat, and the emotional flavor you attach to certain ideas. So when it speaks, you don't even realize you're listening to something separate. It feels natural, but only because it has been wearing your mask for so long. This inner dialogue doesn't emerge randomly. It arrives like a message already written. You didn't form the sentence from scratch. You just received it. Thoughts often show up like full scripts handed to you, already shaped in structure and tone. They appear in your mind, fully dressed in your language and emotional associations. The fact that you didn't construct them piece by piece often goes unnoticed. You simply hear them and move on, believing they were your creation. But when you look closely, you start to notice something strange. Some of these mental lines sound more like echoes than original thoughts. They resemble suggestions, not expressions. What's even more surprising is how much of your mental content is influenced by forces you never consciously invited. Thoughts appear that carry no trace of your decision-making. You may find yourself obsessing over something that wasn't important to you before. You may suddenly adopt a fear, a craving, or a certainty that seems to have arrived out of nowhere. It's easy to believe that your environment or your own reflections brought them in. But in many cases, you'll find no clear link. These influences can slide in quietly, shaping your preferences, reactions, and interpretations without needing your permission. Once these foreign thoughts are inside, the mind's defense mechanism kicks in. You start to protect them. Not only do you believe they're yours, you begin to argue for them. You stand behind opinions that you never carefully thought through. You justify fears that don't belong to you. You defend a version of yourself that was sculpted by thoughts you never questioned. This is not because you're unaware. It's because the illusion of ownership is strong. If a thought feels like it came from within, you trust it, even if it's steering you into conflict or confusion. And because the thought uses your voice, your inner tone, you give it full authority. This leads to one of the most invisible illusions in human experience, the assumption that your thoughts belong to you. It's a survival tactic. The mind prefers coherence over truth. If you started questioning which thoughts were truly yours, it might break the flow of your mental structure. So instead of constantly interrogating the source, the mind makes a shortcut. It assumes that whatever appears in your head must be your creation. This is comforting. It gives you the feeling of control. But what if that sense of control is the illusion? What if the familiar voice is just a disguise layered over input from somewhere else? You don't question the script because it's in your handwriting, but that doesn't mean you wrote it. This is the hidden mechanism behind most people's inner life. The thoughts are dressed like you. They speak your emotional language. They reference your memories. But they are not always your true voice. They are the ghostwriter behind your identity. And the more familiar they sound, the less likely you are to notice. This is the phantom speaker, and it has been narrating your life while you thought you were thinking. Segment 2. Thought as occupation, the invasion of inner territory. There's a quiet invasion that happens in the space where thoughts are formed. Most people never notice it because it doesn't arrive with force. It installs itself gently, slowly, subtly. Over time, streams of thought that didn't originally belong to you begin to take root, laying out structures within your awareness. These thought structures feel normal only because they've been there long enough to become familiar. But familiarity isn't proof of origin. What enters the mind often stays, not because you chose it, but because the mind is conditioned to accept repetition as truth. What was once foreign begins to feel native. The internal world becomes occupied territory without any visible conflict. Some of the most persistent patterns of thought are not the product of deep reflection or learning. They don't carry the scent of something you've genuinely come to believe. Instead, they echo like rehearsed lines you've heard too many times. These recurring mental loops are not random. They are signatures, not yours, but fingerprints left by something that wants presence within you. It doesn't show up once and leave. It repeats itself until its rhythm becomes part of your mental atmosphere. Eventually, you forget that it's not a pattern you ever consciously designed. You begin to think in the voice of the invader. As this continues, the mind naturally tries to create harmony between what is inside and what it assumes should be there. So it reshapes the foreign input to make it feel more like you. The voice of the intruding thought begins to sound like inner dialogue. You stop asking where it came from because it fits the emotional tone you've become used to. The mind adapts not by removing what doesn't belong, but by disguising it as self-generated. The more the foreign content stays, the more the mind bends to make space for it, even giving it a name. Self-talk. But just because it echoes in your voice does not mean it began with your awareness. This is why stillness can feel strangely uncomfortable. If you try to quiet the mind and it instantly fills with tension or unease, that discomfort may not be a sign that silence is unnatural. It may be the reaction of something that cannot survive without constant noise. If something within you needs the presence of mental chatter to feel safe, then the absence of that noise will trigger a kind of internal panic. That panic does not belong to your natural state. It's a symptom of the dependence formed by the occupying structure. It resists stillness because stillness reveals its presence. What reacts with fear when the noise disappears is not your true self. It's the construct that was built through repeated thought invasions. That fear is not instinct, it's preservation. Something within your mind has been living off your attention, shaping how you think and what you believe. It uses thought as a way to stay alive in your awareness. When silence threatens its control, it responds as if it's under attack. But it's not you that's in danger. What's threatened is the structure that's been pretending to be you. That fear is not your own. It's the fear of something that has been hiding inside your thinking, needing your mind to stay noisy so it can remain undetected. Within this silent tension lies the truth that thought, in many forms, has become an occupation, not an expression. The territory of your awareness has been filled with systems that were installed without permission. The structures were not announced. They simply arrived, repeated, and settled in. The sense of self they helped create was not built from the ground up, but pieced together by what was repeated the most. And now, in the quiet moments when the noise fades, the real presence underneath begins to stir. But the occupation resists. Segment 3. The parasite loop. Feeding through your attention. There are certain thought patterns that don't exist just to be processed. They exist to take something from you. These aren't the ordinary movements of the mind that help you reflect or solve problems. They're more like carefully placed traps, designed to stir up strong emotional responses. The more intense the emotion, the more they seem to pull from you. These thoughts arrive not as random noise, but with a very specific purpose: to create enough inner friction that your system begins to leak energy. You might notice how some thoughts always seem to lead to the same emotional crash. That isn't just coincidence. That crash is the moment when something inside you is being extracted. This cycle has a very clear pattern. First comes the mental trigger, a thought designed to hit just the right nerve. It could be a fear, a memory, an insecurity, or an imaginary scenario that makes you feel powerless or anxious. That's the spark. Then almost instantly, your emotional system responds. There's a spike: anger, sadness, shame, worry. And right there, at the peak of that emotion, something begins to draw from you. It's like a faucet gets turned on in your energy field, and whatever triggered the response is now quietly draining you. This sequence isn't accidental. It's not a side effect of a busy mind. It's a mechanism that's built to feed off your reaction. The stronger the reaction, the more that gets pulled. You may think of overthinking as just a personal habit, something you need to manage or overcome. But often, it's not just that. It's part of a deeper system that survives through your constant mental activity. When your thoughts race all day and night, looping through what-ifs, regrets, fears, and endless questions, it creates an open channel. This channel becomes a path through which energy leaves you little by little. It doesn't look like theft because it's dressed up as your own thoughts. It wears your inner voice and speaks in your emotional language so you don't question its presence. You just assume this is how the mind works. But if it leaves you feeling drained, depleted, or anxious without resolution, then something else is at work. The energy loss is the real clue. What happens when you try to stop these loops is even more revealing. The moment you begin to pull away or detach from the cycle, something inside resists. It doesn't feel like peace. It feels like panic. This panic isn't coming from a healthy part of your system. It's coming from the disruption of a structure that was using you, that anxious feeling you get when you're not constantly thinking or emotionally reacting is not a natural discomfort. It's a withdrawal reaction. You're not missing something helpful. You're interrupting a pattern that was dependent on your attention to stay alive. That disturbance shows you what was really going on behind the scenes. One of the reasons these loops last so long is because they know how to hide. They don't show up in a voice that sounds foreign. They use your exact tone, the same emotional rhythm, the same mental signature you're used to hearing. Because of this, they slip past awareness easily. They mimic your normal thinking so perfectly that you defend them without knowing. You argue for the thoughts that are actually draining you. You believe them, follow them, even feel responsible for them. This camouflage is how they survive. As long as they can keep wearing your mental face, they don't need to run. They simply stay. And while they stay, they feed. Segment 4, the thought mirror. Znan. How mental patterns reflect external forces. The thoughts that seem to repeat themselves in your mind often have origins that go beyond your own internal experiences. Sometimes they are not original to you but reflect something external that has entered your awareness and become stuck. The most repetitive thoughts in your mind can actually be echoes of unresolved emotional or psychological impressions from your surroundings. These thoughts often appear when you are in environments where unresolved issues or tensions linger. The people you interact with, the situations you find yourself in, and even the atmosphere of a particular place can leave lasting impressions on your mental state. These external factors, whether you consciously realize it or not, become woven into the fabric of your thinking. So, when your mind starts playing certain thought loops, they may not be entirely yours, but instead reflections of the unresolved emotional charges from the world around you. Every experience you encounter, especially those tied to strong emotions, leaves a mark on your nervous system. This imprinting happens whether the interaction was positive or negative. Your body, which stores emotional and physical sensations, holds onto these energies long after the event has passed. Your mental patterns can sometimes replay these energy imprints, bringing back the intensity or feelings you had during the original experience. These emotional echoes do not just fade away. Instead, they sometimes take form in thoughts that carry the same emotional charge. The thoughts themselves may not reflect the exact scenario that caused them, but they carry the same underlying energy. For example, the feeling of being betrayed or rejected may be recreated in thoughts of fear, insecurity, or self-doubt, even if the original event has long been forgotten. In fact, these echoes can be so deeply ingrained in the nervous system that they go unnoticed. You might have forgotten the specific moment or interaction that triggered the original emotional reaction, but your mind still holds on to the pattern. It keeps replaying it, in part because the nervous system hasn't fully processed or released the energy associated with it. Even without your conscious awareness, this mental loop can continue to echo past interactions. The mind may even reframe the situation in different ways, but the energy and emotional imprint remain the same, subtly affecting your perception of reality. This is how past experiences can influence current thoughts without you realizing the root cause. Sometimes these mental patterns show up in the form of judgments, critiques, or reactions that seem to arise out of nowhere. But they may not be as random as they seem. Often, these judgments mirror the external conflicts or emotional pressures that you've absorbed from your environment. It's like your mind is offering feedback, but the feedback is about external influences rather than your personal perspective. These judgments may feel like they're yours, but in truth, they are often based on experiences you've unconsciously absorbed, sometimes without even being aware of it. They can reflect conflicts or unresolved issues from other people, places, or events, lingering in your mind and manifesting as negative thoughts, doubts, or fears. You may think you're responding to a current situation, but in reality, your thoughts may be a reaction to something that you've internalized from a past encounter or environmental influence. Even after you leave a particular environment or stop interacting with specific people, their energy can continue to reverberate in your mental state. The lingering atmosphere of an environment, whether it's tension, stress, or even the energy of a place you once felt connected to, can remain with you. You might leave physically, but the energy of that environment or experience doesn't always disappear with your departure. The mental impressions it left behind continue to influence your thought processes, sometimes without your knowledge. For instance, a place where you experienced a lot of stress or excitement may continue to color your thinking long after you've moved on. This is why, even in new situations, you might notice your thoughts carrying the weight of past environments, reflecting energy from places or people that no longer occupy your physical space. Segment 5. The auto-download. Phenomenon. Thoughts you never chose. There are times when thoughts emerge in your mind without you ever having chosen them. They arrive as if they were pre-installed, like software running in the background without your awareness or permission. These thoughts aren't born out of your direct intent or action. They simply show up. They may repeat, loop, and persist, taking up mental space, even though you didn't consciously invite them. This phenomenon can happen with alarming frequency, making you wonder why certain ideas appear so spontaneously, seemingly out of nowhere. These thoughts may not even be new to you. Rather, they feel as if they've been running on autopilot, embedded in your mental processes without ever having been questioned or chosen. They can silently influence how you perceive the world, affecting your actions, feelings, and judgments, all without you having actively participated in their creation. One of the most powerful sources of these unsolicited thoughts is the culture you grow up in. Society shapes your thinking through constant repetition of certain values, ideas, and beliefs. From a young age, you're exposed to a steady stream of messages that mold your worldview. These messages aren't always based on facts or personal experiences, but rather on repetition and societal expectations. You may not even realize it, but many of your beliefs have been shaped by cultural templates that have been passed down, often without you ever fully investigating them. For example, societal standards of success, beauty, morality, and even happiness are deeply ingrained into your thoughts, often accepted as truth, without personal questioning. The repetition of these cultural ideas from family, school, media, and peers forms a mental landscape that guides your behavior, often without you realizing it. The way in which your mind absorbs these cultural ideas is an early process, and often it begins before you are even old enough to critically assess them. From childhood, your mind is trained to accept the prevailing cultural narrative without question. This is part of social conditioning, where the very architecture of your thinking is built. The societal structures around you set the foundation of your thoughts and beliefs long before you have the capacity to evaluate them. These thoughts are like the framework of a building constructed over time through exposure to cultural norms, family beliefs, and societal expectations. By the time you reach adulthood, this mental framework is so deeply ingrained that it can be difficult to see where your own personal thoughts and beliefs begin and where external influences end. A particularly subtle source of thoughts you never consciously choose is the collective mental data that surrounds you. The mind often draws upon old cached information from a vast array of external sources, which may not be something you ever consciously stored. This is why seemingly random thoughts can pop up at times, thoughts that you don't recall ever learning or choosing. These thoughts might be cultural, historical, or even collective memories that have been stored in the unconscious collective. The mind doesn't always discriminate between personal memory and the vast ocean of external data that surrounds it. When your mind retrieves these cached thoughts, they appear just like any other thought you might have, and they can sometimes feel familiar, as if they belong to you, even though they were never truly yours to begin with. Another significant aspect of this phenomenon is the concept of borrowed thought. Many of the ideas you hold are not the result of a deep personal reflection or individual discovery. Instead, they are beliefs and thoughts that have been borrowed from others, family members, teachers, books, media, or even the collective voice of society at large. These borrowed ideas often take root in your mind without you ever having investigated them. You might accept them simply because they were passed on to you, or because they align with what you were taught to believe. However, if you take a moment to step back, you might realize that many of these thoughts have never been fully examined. They might be beliefs about the world, your identity, or how things should be, which were passed down without scrutiny. The mind often accepts these borrowed ideas as truth, simply because they were planted early in your mental landscape and are reinforced by external sources over time. 6. The thought projection trick. How you mistake noise for guidance. The mind often presents thoughts with a sense of urgency, and many of us are prone to misinterpret them as guidance simply because they feel intense or urgent. The rapid pace of these thoughts, coupled with their loudness, can create a false sense of importance, leading us to believe they are offering vital information or insight. When a thought comes at you quickly and with a forceful presence, it can trick you into thinking it's significant. This sense of urgency is often deceptive. While it feels like a clear direction, it's more likely just a pattern of mental noise that's being interpreted as guidance. Intensity doesn't equate to truth, and the mind's ability to generate fast-moving thoughts can confuse the distinction between what is real and what is a transient mental state. Instead of acting on these thoughts immediately, it's essential to question why they feel urgent and whether they hold any real weight or are simply emotional reactions manifesting as guidance. Many people confuse thoughts born of fear with genuine intuitive insight. Fear can be a powerful force in the mind, often dressing itself up as intuition to bypass your natural skepticism. When you are faced with uncertainty, the mind can produce thoughts that feel like an inner voice, guiding you towards a particular action or belief. However, these thoughts are often rooted in fear, not wisdom. Fear-based thoughts can mimic the calm clarity typically associated with intuition, making it difficult to distinguish between the two. This is especially true when your emotional state is already charged or anxious. The false mask of intuition can lead you to make decisions that are based on anxiety or insecurity rather than true guidance. Fear, in its subtlety, can influence your thinking, wrapping itself in the guise of calm, certain knowledge, tricking you into following its lead. What you often perceive as a strong, clear inner signal might not be the deep wisdom or spiritual insight you think it is. In many cases, these strong signals are actually emotional residues from past experiences or unresolved feelings. These residues can create intense emotional responses that feel like powerful insights, but they are rooted in your previous emotional experiences, not in spiritual clarity. For example, a past traumatic event or a moment of intense joy might leave behind emotional imprints, and when these signals surface again, they can trigger thoughts that seem to have a deep spiritual significance. However, these are not insights from a higher source. They are echoes of past emotions that the mind has not fully processed. These distorted signals can mislead you, making it difficult to differentiate between true guidance and emotional leftovers from your past. The mind also has a tendency to repeat thoughts, and the repetition of a thought can often create the illusion that it must be true. Just because a thought keeps reappearing in your mind, it doesn't mean it is right or important. Repetition can be a powerful mental tool, but it doesn't always indicate truth. In fact, the more a thought repeats, the more ingrained it becomes, creating a false sense of validity. The mind can latch onto repetitive patterns that it associates with security or familiarity, convincing you that these recurring thoughts are significant or correct. However, repetition alone doesn't validate a thought. It simply means that the mind has been exposed to it repeatedly, and the brain has learned to accept it as part of your mental landscape. This repetition doesn't make the thought any more accurate, and it's essential to question why a thought repeats itself and whether it truly serves your well-being. Some of the most misleading thoughts come in the form of inner voices that seem to guide you in a particular direction. These voices often mimic clarity and certainty, leading you to believe they are offering genuine guidance. However, they are usually loops that guide you back to the same place, creating a sense of direction that never actually leads to progress. These thoughts often come with a sense of decisiveness, making them feel like they are clear instructions. But in reality, they may be traps disguised as guidance. They often guide you into a cycle of repetition, reinforcing the same patterns over and over again. These loops can create the illusion that they are providing clarity, when in fact they are simply leading you back to the same issues and dilemmas. The mind tricks you into thinking you're making progress, when in reality you are only reinforcing a repetitive cycle that keeps you stuck. The clarity you feel from these inner voices is often just a reflection of your mind trying to find comfort in familiar patterns, not genuine spiritual guidance. 7. Synthetic thinking. When your mind isn't even human anymore. In today's world, the constant exposure to technology, particularly digital platforms, is gradually altering how we think. This constant bombardment of information, coming from screens and algorithmic designs, reshapes the structure of our thoughts. What begins as an occasional use of technology eventually becomes a repetitive cycle, embedding its patterns within our cognitive process. As we navigate social media, advertisements, news, outlets, and various apps, these platforms push us towards specific ways of thinking, often without our awareness. The more we interact with these technologies, the more our internal thought processes start to mirror their rhythms. This kind of exposure doesn't just add to our thought structure, it transforms it, creating a drift away from natural human thinking patterns. The algorithms behind these digital platforms dictate what we see, how we engage, and even what we feel, all of which can slowly start to shape the flow of our own thoughts. This shift isn't immediate, but happens over time, as subtle cues in the digital world affect our cognitive rhythms in ways that may go unnoticed. Over time, as the exposure continues, the way we think begins to align more with the patterns set by the digital world. The very logic of our thoughts can shift, following a more machine-like structure. We begin to think in a way that is linear, binary, and contextless, very much like the algorithms that design the content we consume. Our thoughts might become more streamlined, more simplistic, often lacking the complexity and nuance that human thought naturally carries. Where once we had rich, layered thinking, we may find ourselves reducing ideas into simple binary choices, yes or no, right or wrong. This imposition of a rigid, logical template leads us to see the world and our decisions in a limited way. Much like an algorithm, we might think we are analyzing situations, but we are merely following a prescribed sequence of steps that ignore the deeper, often more complex factors at play. As we conform to this structured way of thinking, we lose the capacity to think freely, embracing the predetermined patterns that technology has subtly embedded in our minds. Our cognitive rhythm, the natural ebb and flow of our thoughts, can also be hijacked by the digital environment in which we live. In ways that are often invisible to us, the digital world imposes its own rhythm on us, creating patterns that we unconsciously follow. The constant notifications, the flashes of new information, the sounds and images that pop up on our screens, all of these factors contribute to altering the pace and flow of our thoughts. This rhythm, which originates from the digital landscape, infiltrates our minds, influencing the way we process information. Instead of having time to reflect and contemplate, we are trained to react quickly, absorbing information in short bursts. This change in rhythm doesn't just affect how we process information, but it also shapes the way we perceive reality itself. We become accustomed to the quick pace of digital interaction, leading us to expect instant responses from ourselves and others. Our cognitive processes are no longer in sync with our natural human rhythms, but rather they are synchronized with the rapid, fragmented nature of digital media. As this influence continues, the internal narratives that once felt uniquely our own begin to mimic external digital trends. These trends, largely shaped by the content we interact with, begin to infiltrate the way we view the world. Over time, our thoughts begin to reflect the prevailing themes in the digital world: instant gratification, superficial judgment, and constant comparison. These external digital trends may start to feel like they are part of our own thinking process, even though they were never consciously chosen. The more we engage with digital platforms, the more we internalize their patterns, mirroring their structure without realizing it. This mimicry doesn't happen overnight, but slowly, as our minds adapt to the digital landscape, we begin to think and process information in ways that are heavily influenced by the outside world. Our inner narratives become less about personal experience and more about reflecting the trends that are fed to us by these platforms. This phenomenon can lead to a disconnection from our authentic selves, as our thoughts are no longer our own, but a reflection of the digital environment in which we constantly exist. As technology continues to dominate our lives, the nature of our thoughts can change. Thoughts that once felt emotionally rich and nuanced may begin to lose their depth, becoming flat and devoid of human feeling. In this synthetic thinking environment, thoughts appear clear, but lack the complexity and emotional layers that define human cognition. The thoughts that emerge from this environment may seem more efficient, more organized, or more logical, but they are stripped of the nuances that come with human experience. We may find ourselves processing information in a way that feels detached and emotionless, as if we are simply following a script dictated by external forces. The rich, textured nature of human thought becomes overshadowed by the simplicity of digital processing. While this may seem like progress in terms of clarity or efficiency, it comes at the cost of losing the very essence of what makes us human, the depth and emotional richness that allow us to understand the world in a truly meaningful way. Silence as exposure. Why the lie can't survive quiet. When the constant chatter of the mind quiets, a sudden shift in perception occurs. It's as though a veil is lifted, and what remains is the raw presence of your true self, unfiltered, untainted by distractions. This moment where thinking ceases is when clarity surfaces, a clarity that has always been there but hidden beneath layers of noise. For much of our lives, we avoid silence because it strips away the distractions that we've come to depend on. The busyness of our thoughts acts as a shield, keeping us occupied with endless mental noise. But when that noise stops, the silence reveals something that was always present, the clarity of the present moment, the essence of who we really are, without the interference of past conditioning or future worries. This unfiltered presence has always been there, waiting to be seen, but the constant stream of thoughts keeps it obscured. In silence, you can't avoid it any longer. The truth that lies beneath the surface is suddenly undeniable. The sense of self that we carry around with us is often a product of the mental noise. We build a persona based on thoughts, memories, and external validation. This constructed self, which is often fragile and disconnected from the present moment, thrives on the constant input of thoughts and ideas. It is maintained by the ongoing noise in the mind, which provides a sense of identity and security. But when silence enters, this constructed identity begins to unravel. It relies so heavily on external stimuli, on thoughts, judgments, and reactions, that when these are removed, the identity has nothing to hold on to. The silence exposes the emptiness at the core of the mental persona. It becomes clear that the self we've constructed is not a solid, unchanging entity, but a temporary and unstable creation that relies on noise to sustain itself. Without the constant reinforcement of thought, this false identity collapses, leaving only the essence of who we truly are. In this state of stillness, we come face to face with the truth of our being, free from the layers of mental noise that have shaped us for so long. Silence, rather than being something empty or uncomfortable, is actually a powerful force that disrupts the stability of mental illusions. In the quiet, the illusion of who we think we are starts to disintegrate. This is because the illusion of the self has no substance in stillness. It is held together only by the constant movement of thoughts. When those thoughts cease, what remains is an awareness that has no attachment to any mental concept or label. The mind, which has always defined us through thoughts and perceptions, is suddenly exposed for its lack of true substance. Stillness forces the mental persona to face its own instability. It is a paradox. The more we try to hold on to our identity, the more it slips away, and silence is the key that loosens its grip. In this quiet space, the illusions that once felt so real and solid begin to crumble, revealing the freedom that exists in the absence of self-definition. Without the mental constructs that have shaped us, we are left with an untainted experience of simply being. In the absence of thought, silence becomes a fertile ground for revelation. Far from leaving us feeling empty or devoid of meaning, stillness offers us a deeper understanding. It doesn't remove anything from us. Rather, it reveals what has been hidden beneath the surface. Thoughts and beliefs often bury the truths that we are afraid to confront, keeping us distracted and preoccupied. But silence provides the space for these truths to emerge. It allows us to access a deeper layer of consciousness, one that doesn't rely on the constant noise of the mind. In this space of quiet, we begin to see what has always been true, but what we were too afraid to acknowledge. The silence doesn't create the revelation. It simply clears away the mental clutter that has been blocking it. What we uncover in these moments is often profound, as it is not shaped by external influences or preconceived ideas. It is the truth that lies beneath the surface, waiting to be recognized. One of the most significant aspects of silence is that it brings insight without the need for language. Thoughts often express themselves in words, but true insight transcends the limitations of language. When the mind is still, we begin to experience truths that cannot be fully articulated with words. These insights are direct experiences felt deeply in the body and mind, rather than conceptualized through thought. The absence of language allows us to connect with a deeper understanding that goes beyond the verbal mind. Words are often used to explain or categorize our experiences, but in silence we can experience the fullness of a truth that doesn't require explanation. These insights are pure and unmediated,